Well, I've never really been speechless as soon as the record button started flashing, but today I'm feeling all of the emotions as I sit down and get to kind of recap this experience with two dear friends. Marina, who's here, was actually on the last episode, which was titled Access, Sustainability, Stewardship, and Conservation. Which was a really great episode and definitely one to maybe start with or go back to after this episode. And I'm also joined by Khrystyne Capan. And I'm going to let you two take it away. Khrystyne, go ahead and kick us off with your intro. Tell us a little bit about who you are and how you ended up on this podcast today with Marina and myself.
I am Khrystyne Capan. My friends call me KK, so by all means, call me KK. I was introduced to Court a little over 4 years ago, and I attended one of her first archery camps and fell in love with everything outdoors after that camp and have just really been embracing that lifestyle since then. And here we are now, 4.5 years later, traveling together and checking things off our bucket list. And I'm here for it.
So my name is Marina, and I'm originally from Washington State, but I split time between here and Hawaii, Maui specifically. And I'm in the conservation sustainability field. I met Courtney, actually. We've been talking for quite a few years now online. We actually got to meet in person this spring, and we'd been talking about creating a trip to Maui to go hunting together for some time, and the pieces aligned this year, and it was just an amazing experience to be able to have two wonderful women come out and get to go in the mountains and spend some time out in the woods. And it's a very interesting dynamic when you meet people that share similar passions and have very similar drive. And both of these women that we're here with today embody all of that. And it was an awesome experience. And I think that, in general in life, it's when you have the opportunity to do the things, do the things. And, we're all in different places and we're all doing, all these different pieces in our lives. But when you have the opportunity to come together and really lean on each other and grow and have amazing laughter and all these different pieces, it's a gift. And I feel very fortunate to have been able to spend that time with you guys. And now I'm back in Washington, working on some more sustainability projects and getting back into leatherworking again for the upcoming season and prepping for fall hunting.
And it's right around the corner, which is pretty awesome. And that's one of the reasons I really love these kind of, spring or late or early summer hunts, is because you get a little buy-in time between some of the bigger, hunts in the fall, and it gets you outdoors, kind of gets you exploring. And I think it's a great way to go and do some kind of off the map or kind of different hunts than what you're used to in that kind of normal, hunting season. Really nice to have you there as well. It's not like just, three mainlanders went over to the island. We got to lean on your knowledge and really, into your passions and the things that really drive you and make you excited to be outdoors. And so it was great. And honestly, and this is something we'll talk about, and if you've hung out with me ever for anything, you know that at some point I will ask you, what was your favorite part about today? Or what was your one of my favorite things truly was just really feeding off of your excitement and love, untainted love for Hawaii and for the native species and for, for everything that encompasses the islands. So I just want to say, before we get too far into this, thank you just for being who you are and for being willing to share that with other people.
It's whatever your passion is, whatever the things are that you really care about, those probably have a lot to tell you about your purpose. And, I think as we've connected too, and being in that similar mindset, I've done some similar pieces in my life where, I think as you reflect on it and are able to connect with people and figure out what things you really care about and are involved in, those have a really beautiful way of opening windows for the next steps in your life. And, going to the mountain where we were able to spend time it's just magical up there. And all of those plant species, people talk about their happy place, and it really is. Being in that mountain is absolutely the happy place to be up there and see all of the plants flourishing. And, I think it's awesome to be able to share that.
it's very grounding. And then watching Marina with all of her passion is just very intoxicating. There was a moment where she had me touch one of the trees, and please forgive me, I don't remember the name of the tree, but it was one, I think one of the very first, yes. And you said, touch this tree. And I put my hand on it and I closed my eyes and I was just still in that moment. And it was just this flood of warmth, like in my heart and in my soul. And it just anchored me. It was incredible.
We could honestly just kind of rehash all of these emotions and all these feelings. And I really want to get people into kind of how all of this came to be. And like you kind of alluded to, you and I, Marina, had been talking for several years. I don't even know how long. It was shortly after we recorded that last podcast, the Access Sustainability piece, that you kind of reached out on almost, like a last minute whim. And you were like, hey, do you want to come hunt Hawaii? And to be honest, and without trying to like get into this like hustle mentality, which just is a part of what my life is right now, I didn't know how I would carve in the time. And I really didn't have much of a wiggle room. But before I even knew how it would work out, I basically was like, yes, like I need to do this trip and I need to just figure out how to make it happen. Because if I've learned anything in the last few years, it's that life is fragile and, nothing is guaranteed. And you have to make time for the things that set your soul on fire, even if you don't know how the hell it'll end up working out. And as soon as I said yes, I was like, can I bring my friend Khrystyne? And there's been a pretty, I don't want to say looming, but I'm going to say looming reason and incentive to do some of these bucket list trips, which I'm going to actually ask Khrystyne to kind of talk about a little bit, just to give a little preface to kind of why this trip was so powerful and so meaningful. So Khrystyne, if you don't mind kind of giving us a little backstory into kind of what you've been dealing with this last year.
In August of 22, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And by September, the diagnosis had changed from not only being diagnosed with breast cancer, but having metastatic breast cancer. And my entire skeleton is covered in breast cancer. And so the prognosis is really kind of what you make of it and what treatments are available to you. And so we are doing all of the things. We are doing everything Western medicine is offering, as well as everything naturopathic is doing. And so I don't feel like I have this ticking time bomb behind me at this moment, but previously there was definitely time was just ticking and ticking and ticking and ticking. Literally the same month that my husband retired, I got this diagnosis. We got the beginnings of the diagnosis with finding the lump and then going through all the different the different processes of imaging, blood work, et cetera, et cetera. And so in that moment, you go from evaluating this grind that you're on and what exactly has that grind been for? It's all been for wonderful things, but you get lost and not doing the things that you've always wanted to do for one reason or another. And this access hunt is something that I've always wanted to do. I have screenshots from like 2017 of the first time I ever saw an axis deer. And I was just amazed by the beauty of them. And I just really wanted to see one out in the wild. Right. And so that's really kind of where that came to fruition. And then earlier, I think it was earlier this year, may have been October, Court, when you were here in Folsom with us. And you said, what's your ultimate dream hunt? And I'm like, going to Maui and hunting axis deer would just be clutch. Like that would be everything and anything to me. I've never been to the islands. I've always wanted to go. You phoned me up and said, hey, do you want to go to Maui June 11th through the 17th? I can remember my husband was on the other side of the house, and it didn't even take a meeting of asking or discussing it. I just said yes. Yes. Again, like, let's go. Let's do this. And so my husband came from the other side of the house after we hung up, and I said, babe, I'm going to Maui. I'm done wasting my time here. Like I keep wanting to do all of these things, but the grind keeps getting in the way. And I'm done. I have to. now is the time I start saying yes to things and not saying maybe later. So
It's very eye-opening
mhm.
how, a diagnosis at this volume can make you pause and make you go, okay, what do I need to do now? And how can I start really living?
Mhm.
Right? It's almost like, wow, is this really what it takes for human beings to slow their life enough to actually feel like they're going to put their roots in and live?
Right.
These last few years have showed me like tomorrow isn't promised for anybody, whether you have a diagnosis or not. And so if we're spending most of our time, which many of us need to do, right? We've got to make a dollar, we've got to earn the money to do the things. But if we're living with this mentality that we have to get to a certain point of our life before we start doing the things that excite us, I'm not really sure if we're living the right kind of life that we're meant to live.
It's really an interesting thing to think about too, because the perspective that you get, even just being around the two of you, and Courtney, when I reached out and asked about you guys coming out, um, her response, it was just like, I mean, she said, okay, yes. And then it was the next thing that I knew, there were flight reservations, and I was like, oh, this is actually happening. Like, this is, this was like, we're actually doing this thing. And that's amazing. Like, that was a very, incredible gift of perspective for me too, because I think it does make you realize, I know when we spent the time out in Maui too, I had spoke a little bit about I'd lost my father to cancer about 2 years ago, and that's he was a fundamental part of who I am, and I felt him a lot there. And I remember one day, initially when we first started, Courtney picks up this heart rock and like shows me this heart rock, and he used to do that all the time when I was like a kid and growing up. Gets me like in the feels. But to see that and just be like, this is your tribe, and not only the diagnosis, for you, KK, and like also having the community to know that we're going to rally around each other and be there, and just, it's just like you pick up, it's like your tribe, when it's your people.
And I know leaving this trip with you guys, we were all pretty emotional. And in the days after we all left the island, there was a lot of tears flowing and a lot of messages. And just like, I feel like, I've had a lot of pretty incredible hunts that I've been blessed to do. And this one, I just left with something deeper than the experience of the hunt. I also can't feel my legs right now because I am recording by sitting on the ground. So let me switch real fast. It's like, why is your foot purple? Oh, you can't feel it. Got it.
Courtney is the master of being able to sit still. We will give her that award. That is,
oh my gosh,
it was incredible. This is some, there should be medals for this.
She's like the timeout queen. Like she understood the assignment when her parents sent her to the corner. She was just like,
she understood the sitting assignment. That was amazing. That was amazing.
It was very uncomfortable. I was actually sore. My body was physically sore that next day. I channeled this, like what I would almost imagine as like this like monk level of just like silence and inner peace. I kept imagining the panda from Kung Fu Panda where he's just like inner peace, inner peace, inner peace.
It was very impressive.
That's all I could do in the moment. Let's get into the things. Let's start breaking down this hunt. So we end up in Hawaii with really kind of limited notice. And I don't think we've even mentioned it to this point, but we pretty much just kind of committed, maybe slightly my suggestion, like let's go full draw or nothing. Like let's just make this like a bow hunt, and just see how the cards unfold. So we pack up our bows, we get to Hawaii, we spend what I think is going to be like one of a couple, little beach trips down to the beach. It's super windy and I'm going, how are we ever going to hunt or shoot in this, So we have a little bit of beach time on day one, and then we get right into the grind. And when I'm talking grind, I'm saying, we're getting up at, between 3:30 and 4 a.m. and getting on it and getting to it. So let's start with day one and kind of walk through what that day looked like and kind of give people this visual of kind of the terrain, the elements, the weather.
Sure. So Maui is very unique in the sense that it has 11 of the 13 climate zones. So the only two that it doesn't have are Arctic and subarctic. With that understanding, you can be on the beach and it's 85 and sunny and can be really windy and, all of these different pieces. And then you can get up to elevation. We were anywhere between like 6,000 and 8,000 feet. and it's completely different. And so when we get up to the mountain, I kind of told the ladies too, make sure, sometimes you're going to want warm and sometimes you're going to want, weather or clothing for cold weather as well. And, getting up to those mountains, we started out in some like fairly dense cover, some big like pine trees, and we're following up these gulches, kind of just getting our feet wet, figuring out what the terrain was. This is public land hunting in Hawaii, and it actually, has the opportunity for not only axis deer, but also for feral goats and pigs as well. Almost immediately upon getting into the woods, we definitely found signs. The rut behavior this year for the axis deer, normally they rut from May to July. And the rut behavior was actually slightly different and a little bit later this year, which ended up being, really effective for us because by the time you guys came out, they were just really starting to get into it. And we were seeing all these rubs all over the trees. And the main tree up in those areas is called wattle. And it actually gets this real bright red color when the deer scrape and rake on it. And so we started walking through the woods and we were seeing all sorts of different signs and, getting up into the mountain. And a lot of those native species we were kind of talking about earlier too, made it so it was actually very quiet to walk in, which was really nice. We kind of got up to these, series of gulches to cross that were not peaches and cream. They can go a couple 100 feet, down some of them and, at least like 50 feet wide. And then you're going back up the other side and, it's a lot of lava rock in the area as well. And, you ladies, you chewed it up and just took on the ground, and we started covering, distances and ended up on this ridge where we thought maybe this would be a good spot to kind of just sit for a little bit. It was a convergence zone of some areas where other animals, clearly had been coming through. And
we were in that convergence, and you have ears of a hawk, and you heard something coming around and you're like, knock an arrow. And so I was kneeling at the time. And part of what I have going on with my diagnosis is some of the medication that I have, that I take, does not allow me to have full functioning joints. And it can be kind of a pain in the booty, for lack of a better way to say that. And so I was in this kneeling position and drawing back, and we were kind of on this slight little incline. And we were in terrain that was really quiet. We were in a lot of grass, and we had some weather come through and it was wet. And I can remember knocking the arrow and just kind of coming up to my knees a little bit, trying to see what was going on. And I hit that incline and I just started like a little worm or a little snake going up and down through that wet grass, and finally getting some visual on the goats there. And by the time I had came around that little grove of trees, they were just magically gone.
That's the thing about bow hunting too in general that's so tough, is so many moving pieces have to come together. Mm-hmm. It's like you can go and practice and you get your shot process down and you get all those pieces, and then you add the elements to it, and you add the weather to it, and you add being with other people, and all of these factors have to come together.
It was really cool because that was really kind of our first excitement. Sure, we're walking through there, and we essentially kind of did maybe a little faster version of a still hunt through most of this day, outside of a couple times where we just really sat and kind of soaked it in and kind of waited things out. We were in an area that had a lot of sign, an area where they had everything. They had food, bedding, they have travel corridors. It was quiet. We could see the trails that they had been on. We could see fresh rubs. So we, it looked promising. And so we ended up deciding to just kind of sit in an area for a little bit. It was pretty chilly, I would say. It was probably, I don't know, maybe 47 to 52 degrees pretty foggy, misty. We were all pretty wet at that point. We had came across some pretty fresh deer scat. And we thought, well, this is a good opportunity. There's rubs right here. They're in this area. They've been in this area recently. So we'll just sit and wait. And it's funny because I don't know what it was, if it was just that we were having fun or whatever. We're sitting there pretty quiet. And we just got the giggles. And, as much as I feel like, yeah, we could have maybe played that whole thing differently. That's one of my favorite memories of the trip, was just laughing until I was concerned I was going to pee in my pants, and just watching the tears roll down our face and just having those moments and getting to do that. It's like, I don't know about y'all, but I spent almost my entire hunting life hunting with the boys or hunting by myself. And so in that moment, sitting there, just like feeling like, man, I'm gonna have abs when I leave this trip from laughing so much, and just getting to experience that was definitely my favorite part of that day. Day 2, so we go home. We did call a little bit early. I think that was kind of my call, and that's I would say, one of the things I would do differently is we left a little daylight on day 1. And really, I guess in my mind, and this is really just a misjudgment of mine, was, there's more time, there will be more opportunities. We've seen so much sign. We're, going to be, in a good situation tomorrow when we come back out fresh. Let's go home. We're soaking wet. We could have hunted a few more hours on that day. But we went home, got home, close to dark, had some dinner, got in bed. And one of the things that I think is really great about Khrystyne is especially coming from somebody who I would consider to be a pretty new hunter. She asked me, she's like, what could I have done better today? And I think no matter what, if she could have or if she couldn't have, having that mindset of like, how can I show up and be more effective, or how can I do better, or refine my skills, I think is such a great way to approach any hunt at no matter what level of, a hunter you are. So I just have to say, Khrystyne, I really appreciated that you were so willing to kind of assess and take inventory on, how you could, show up differently, which was awesome.
There's always room to learn, and at the end of the day, I feel like you should always take a step back and be like, okay, what can I have done differently? And, I'm there as a constant learner, and knowing that we were there for so many more days, like I wanted to be able to take whatever input you could give me and apply it to the rest of the trip, so that I could not only make it more successful for myself, but for us, cumulatively. I want to be a partner in this, and I want to be, an integral team player. And so I appreciate you for giving me the honest feedback. And, I feel like I took the feedback and made better choices the next day.
You really touch on something that's so important, especially when you're in a situation like this. Like, there's a lot of people that hunt together that have been hunting together pretty much their entire life, and they know the ins and outs and the signs and the movements and when to stop and when to move and, when to do all those things. And when you're hunting with people who are new to you, right? When you're in an element that you've not been in with a person who you've not been in it with, it's really important to, try to figure out, like you said, how can I be an integral part to this team to where we're all kind of working towards the same goal in a really effective way. And I think that's a good mindset to continue to have, especially if you're going to be in a situation where you're hunting with new people, or people that you don't typically hunt with. So going into day 2, one of the things that you and I talked about, Khrystyne, that night is, do we need to get up earlier? Because despite our getting up that first morning at 4:15, we got a late start to that hunt. So you and I that next morning got up early, made it happen, packed for the day. You did a great job, and thank you very much for keeping us fed on that trip. That was amazing. So we got up and got out there. Marina, you had some prior arrangements and things that you needed to work on and kind of take care of that morning. So Khrystyne and I went out and kind of made our game plan, and we went to an area that the previous day we had heard an animal. I believe it was a deer from what it sounded like, moving around kind of down below us. And the fog had moved in, visibility was really low. And so, for several reasons, we ended up not, seeing that animal and just kind of knowing that they were in there. The amount of sign in this specific spot blew my mind. And, it's like every square inch of wherever you could walk was either littered with scat, or, you were seeing rubs, or you were seeing tracks or bedding areas. And Khrystyne and I had decided to kind of make our way over into that area and spend some time just kind of sitting, waiting for some movement. And, so we went over and we kind of nestled ourselves into this little kind of a little bowl in this gulch. And it was great because we had a pretty good amount of visibility, and our wind was really good for the spot. And it allowed us to have a little bit more movement because we were kind of down below, where we can kind of get ourselves comfortable and have the grace of getting to move around a little bit more. And we sat there for quite a while, for several hours, and we kept hearing things, and we were really close to the edge of a eucalyptus forest. And so, that's obviously a lot louder than some of the other areas in the pine areas that we were in. And so you could hear the animals moving through there, and we couldn't always see again because the fog would kind of move in and out. And so we kind of started joking around, and I'm like, every time we would hear it, one of us would get up and we'd be looking around and using our glass. And one of the last times, and again, it's been like hours at this point, and I hear this little snap, and clearly sounds like an animal, but every other time that had happened, I looked and I couldn't end up identifying where this animal was at. So jokingly, without looking, and Khrystyne is in front of me, we're kind of facing each other, and her back is to where this noise is coming from. And I say, "Is it you?" Like joking, like maybe this is the time the deer is going to come out. And so she just she's kind of hunkered over, and she kind of slowly turns, and she just peeks over her shoulder, and she whips her head back around, and she looks at me, and I will never forget this. She goes, "It's a buck. It's a big buck, big buck, big buck." And I'm like, awesome. Like, that's what we're here for. And I'm like, "Get your bow." And she's like, I can't, you get your bow. And I'm like, what? I'm thinking, what in the hell? Like, this is not like, we are here for you to shoot this freaking deer. And I was like, "How far?" She's like, 10 yards. And I'm like, "Oh shit. Like, we don't have time to get your bow at this point. Mine's right here." And I don't know if it was the situation or how close, or the fact that Khrystyne's like, "Big buck, really big buck," that immediately my heart just started racing. And I'm like, "Okay, calm your breath." And so I'm like, trying to compose myself, get my breathing back down. And I looked at her and I was like, "I'm shaking," and I was like, okay, because I could then see where this buck was at, and it was perfect. I'm like, holy cow, I can't believe that this buck is right here and he's going to feed right here. And I've got this beautiful window for this shot.
Literally a window.
Right in front of us to our side was this ohia tree, which you had explained to us is, it brings all the good juju in Hawaii. And so we were feeling really good about that. But at the base of this tree where it split, there was this perfect window. And this buck was moving, and he was feeding, just kind of milling around with the wind at his back from left to right. And he was going to come perfectly in front of this opening at 12 yards. So I take a few breaths. I'm working to calm myself down. It's a target. You got this. I come to full draw as his head is behind a big wad of bushes, because I know he can't see me. And sure enough, he feeds right into that little hole. Well, what I did not account for was that from what I could see, there was this little ridge and a little rock with almost a little point on top. And that buck, instead of feeding kind of onto that, fed behind it at like 16 yards. And so he came over, I'm at full draw, and he sees us move, or senses or hears or something. And he goes from living his best life to whips his head around and is now staring at me at 16 yards away. And his vitals are almost completely covered by the stupid flipping rock. And I'm thinking, okay. And I say to Khrystyne, don't move. Because I'm thinking maybe he doesn't see us. We've got so much cover. I just have this little window. Maybe he won't, maybe he'll just go back to feeding. He hasn't winded us. We've got the wind. We should be good. If he takes like 3 more steps, I can let my arrow fly. But he doesn't. He barks and he spins. And then he stops. And I'm thinking, okay, so he still doesn't know what we are. He still hasn't, winded us. Maybe there's a chance. So I'm standing there. And then he barks again and he takes off. And I have never said so many bad words in a row in my life. In all reality, I've gone through this situation and replayed this thing so many times. There's a lot of people that would have taken that shot. He was perfectly broadside, and I had the top part of his vitals. But from what I had heard, that they can be really dodgy, they can duck an arrow, they can be a little bit more like a whitetail. There was a really good chance, even at 16 yards, because he had me pegged, because he was looking in my direction, he probably would have jumped that string and I would have either spined him or hit him in the void or potentially missed completely. But at 16 yards, I probably would have hit high. And it just wasn't a situation or a shot that I felt good about taking. So shortly after this, I think you, Marina, had text and said, you're kind of wrapping things up at home and, should you meet out or, whatever. And so you had decided, yeah, I'll meet you out. I'm going to kind of go a different route and we'll end up making my way to you at some point.
Kind of early mid-afternoon, and I started coming up a similar way that we had gone earlier, but ended up, kind of navigating some of the different gulches to see if there were more opportunities, and I was like stalking pretty slowly as I was working up, which is a very interesting dynamic in general, as a bow hunter, when you're going in solo versus when you're with other people. I think in general, all the 3 of us did well. You could tell when we would get tired, we wouldn't be as quiet, but generally speaking, we were all pretty quiet. And when one of us would stop, the other ones would stop. But that afternoon that I was coming up, was definitely seeing a lot of sign, as I was coming up and, hearing animals, and kind of I would wait and see if, if they would start to show themselves. But I really, kept going back to the fact that this hunt, this experience, I, number one, wanted to be able to spend with you guys, and also, in a supportive role. I'd harvested my deer, by that point, and I really wanted to be able to come out and spend it with you. And so when I got up to that spot where you guys had been sitting, where that buck had come out and such, and Courtney asked at the end of the trip, what one of our favorite moments was, and I think us reuniting in that moment was definitely one of those pieces, because there were a lot of feelings that were going around there. There was like the intensity of having the the buck having come through, and then also being like, okay, like we're still in this is what we're going to do this afternoon, and just those pieces moving around was it was good to like be able to reconnect with you guys. And as we went back down out of the mountain, that ended up actually being, one of the solid afternoons as well. We got down to this area that was kind of bordering where a lot of the eucalyptus trees in the forest had come through, and we realized, it was really loud trying to get through there. And so we ended up kind of bypassing it and going down through the fields, which, ended up being, it was a little bit chilly with the rain and, the fog coming in, but it was also really beautiful in that area. And we kind of made a decision to set up, in one of the lower parts of the field that had a lot of visual for animals coming in. When we had come in and we'd come out that one day, we saw that goat on the way out. We bumped him, as a big billy. And so we went, that area I think could really hold some animals. And so we kind of started to post up and get under these trees. And it took us a little bit of time to figure out who's going to sit where, how they're going to sit. And that was the day that, ultimately, once we did get set in, we really sat for some significant amount of time. And that helped a lot. I think a lot of the animals in Hawaii, you have success if you can really be quiet. And, mainland probably same too, but, really is as much a mental game as it is a physical game, to just get yourself into that space of what you need to do to be quiet in an area. And not only does that give you the opportunity to, see and observe the things that are going around, but you can also hear. And that evening, I could hear out of my right ear. I was sitting and I was kind of facing Courtney, and KK was off to my left, and I was a little bit higher up in elevation from them, so I could see a little bit more, but I could hear something was going on across the field. And I was like, I can't quite make out what it is, but I was consistently hearing it, and then we would hear those sticks break, off to our left in the, ravine, and we're kind of watching. We actually ended up, that was the day we saw those little pigs too. The little baby pigs came through. They came right behind the brush that we were sitting in. They never even saw us either, before, during, or after, which is one of the most amazing experiences when you hunt. That's the goal, right? Is whether you're taking a shot or not, is to be in that space. And that evening started to settle in, and I could hear something going off into my right, but I couldn't quite see it. And then we saw the two goats come down over the top of the hill. And as they came down, I was like, okay, this is it. Like, these can be the opportunities. And they actually ran down the hill. So it was, kind of escalated faster than you think it does. Sometimes the animals, especially with the deer, most of the time they're kind of, methodical with how their movement is, unless they're running away from something. But these goats, they weren't upset or anything. They were just like scampering around, but they came right underneath that mamani tree, and they were just sitting there for a while and watching and looking. And KK was starting to get ready, and we knew we were starting to battle the dark coming in. It was getting really close to where sunset was. And those are those moments that you kind of replay too. Like, do you, in hindsight, do you like try to have crept up a little bit further, to get closer to them? We were in a pretty open area, so it was pretty tough to, to think about, unless you kind of crawled. I think, maybe you could have been able to get in. They were about 200 yards out when we initially saw them. And, that darkness was coming in, and then we saw a bunch more come down the hill. So it was, it was an interesting dynamic, because that's a lot of eyes. The more eyes that you have to every bit of movement that you do, they're going to have more opportunity to be able to notice you. And, it was a lot closer for sure. I felt like, we were getting in the animals, like the things were happening, but it was just getting a little bit too dark at that point. And, just didn't quite have the pieces come together for it. But, I think we left that day, feeling, even though it was cold, we were both, or all three of us were like definitely cold by the end of that. And, Courtney, like, it was unbelievable. She literally didn't move for hours. And I'm like, I mean, I'm pretty good at still sitting, but, every once in a while I was like, oh, my leg or something like that. It was amazing. It was an amazing thing to see.
Inner peace.
Yeah, that was awesome.
But Khrystyne, I have to tell you, one thing I really appreciated about you in that moment was that through your uncomfortableness and through, some of the things that you were dealing with that moment, you had actually texted Marina, like, I'm going to pee my pants. And we were both kind of like, great, well, it's not going to be dark for another hour, so have fun with that. And exactly. you owned it. We just both looked at you like, sorry.
Exactly. It's like the kid that comes in at 11 o'clock at night and says their homework is due tomorrow and they need your help. And you're like, sorry, you're on your own now. Yeah.